My name is Ron. I'm Product Marketing Manager here at Scalr. And joining me today is Patrick Baker. Patrick, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Baker. I'm a Principal Solutions Engineer with Scalr. Today, I cover the East Coast of US and some opportunities also in Europe. But yeah, thank you for having me here.
So the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to do just a brief Scalr introduction to make sure that we're all on the same page and everybody's aware of what Scalr is and where we're coming from. After that, we're going to jump right into a discussion about building resilient applications. So we're going to be talking about disaster recovery and fault tolerance and pretty much everything in between those two. Before we jump into the demo and the hands-on, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today, we're going to just try to understand what makes a resilient app and basically going to set that up for everybody before we go in. As we're going through this, please feel absolutely free to submit your questions to the GoToWebinar question panel. We're not going to pause for questions before or after the demo, so just feel free to submit your questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to hit all of those different questions as they come in, and if not, we'll just follow up over email. We are recording today's webinar, so you'll be able to see it on demand as well, and you'll get it to your inbox after we're done here. Okay, Patrick, I have the screen now, and I have it on the main slide. Are you on, which slide are you on, firstly?
Yeah, sorry, guys. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm on the agenda slide right now. It says audience view is 100%, but apparently that's not the case. Just curious, Kate, are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. Okay, so
it says agenda.
All right, cool. So it's yeah, so it's probably just lagging on my end. Yeah, so we can just go ahead and move forward. So let's go ahead and move to slide number 4, and I just want to give everybody a brief overview of basically the Scalr Cloud Management Platform to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So as I did mention, Scalr is the enterprise hybrid cloud management platform, and what it does, it delivers safe, responsible, cost-effective self-service. And in order to do that, we touch on mainly 4 areas of concern. And those areas of concern are business agility, security and compliance, user productivity, and cost optimization visibility. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but in the types of enterprises that we work with and the types of companies that adopt a multi-cloud strategy or a hybrid cloud strategy, like the ones that we're going to be talking about today, so whether it be something like a VMware infrastructure and an AWS infrastructure or multiple public clouds, the same types of problems emerge, and those problems typically fall into those 4 major categories. So if it's cost, it's the ability to track and control and hold teams and business units accountable. And if it's user productivity, it's basically enabling teams to basically be 10x more productive with those cloud services. Often we see the same cycle as companies adopt the public cloud, where it starts as sort of a Wild West, where developers or application teams go directly into the cloud consoles and start provisioning, and they have a gain on productivity, but then in the end of the day, there's a detriment to finance, to cost, or security as the attack surface grows. So a cloud management platform basically sits on top of your hybrid and multi-cloud environments and provides you a standardized way to consume those resources and deliver those resources and track the usage of your application teams. If we move over to slide number 5, I quickly want to touch on this concept of federation of IT teams, which is basically what this means is that we will map to the hierarchy and the structure that you have in your organization in order to make the application teams more productive and make the different constituencies in the enterprise more productive. We find that there are a lot of different enterprise groups that are all involved in the effort that is a hybrid cloud strategy or the hybrid cloud infrastructure. So the Federation of IT Teams is actually a term that was coined by one of our customers. And what it means is that IT teams need to get the autonomy and operational flexibility they need while IT can actually maintain corporate compliance and cloud best practices. So through what we call the Scalr organizational model, which we're not going to get too deep into that today, but this is just for some context and background, we're able to enable that productivity. Central IT, that the entity in the enterprise that usually owns cloud, they can enforce compliance policies, or they can track spend or set budgets, or basically manage the cloud from a higher level, and then assign different accounts off to their business units. And you can think about this kind of like a federal government, where you have your administration and you have your state and you have your city, and each level of management can make their own rules. Each level of management can essentially set their own policy, but they still have to comply with the policies set by the level above them. So very similar to that, you can create this sort of hierarchy in your organization, where at the end of it, as we'll also see today in some of our examples, you'll be able to provide the self-service that your end users are going to need. So the reason that I'm giving this kind of lengthy introduction to all of this is really because there are a lot of different aspects that we can talk about. We can talk about self-service, and we can talk about automation, and we can talk about security or cost visibility. But today we do want to focus on the automation aspect and the disaster recovery aspect, and everything that we need in order to build resilient applications. So if we can move over to slide 6, where we can see some of the results from a survey that we ran recently. Recently, we ran a survey on hundreds of IT leaders from companies with over $500 million in annual revenue, so large enterprises. Most of the respondents were from over $1 billion companies. And one of the questions that we asked people was to rank essentially why they're moving to the cloud. So what is their main driver for moving to the cloud? This is the result of that. The majority marked disaster recovery as one of the main drivers of adopting a multi-cloud strategy or adopting a hybrid cloud strategy, since people want to leverage a lot of the built-in disaster recovery capabilities that you get in the public cloud. So Patrick, I'd like to kind of open this up to you. Could you talk a little bit about, before we jump into the demo and the technical stuff, what is a resilient app, before we actually talk about the disaster recovery itself and the mechanisms that we can use to put it in place? What do you see as a resilient application?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Ron. And yeah, this is just really for general context. Most of you guys, or at least hopefully most of you guys are already familiar with this. So I apologize for the review here. But for those of you guys that are not super familiar, a resilient application basically should be able to withstand any kind of outages that may happen, right? If a node goes down, right, you want to kind of eliminate single node points of failure, and you want to be able to recover automatically. So you want to be able to trigger recovery via some automation, orchestration type tools. And then also you want to, as much as you can, you want to leverage the capabilities of a cloud platform that can help you achieve the app resiliency, fault tolerance that you're looking for. So this could be anything from, of course, scaling out your your web service nodes to be able to handle more load, just so that your web app doesn't actually fall over, to, if you had some kind of a failure event in your main database, being able to quickly promote a secondary database, right, in its place, and replicate to a new secondary database as well. So there's lots of examples of this, but this is very, very high level, and actually very excited to kind of talk to you guys about some examples that we've also set up here.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, so I mean, just to kind of recap what you said. So basically, a resilient application is a type of application that is sort of designed with failure in mind, where each one of the machine that no one machine can bring the entire application down. This kind of goes back to the Randy Bias's pets versus cattle thing that also ties into it. So, and one of the reasons that we're sort of making this point is that because we're talking about more than your classic disaster recovery of this one thing goes down and then that triggers like a chain reaction that brings a replacement up for that thing, which we're also going to cover today and going to talk about today. But basically, we see a resilient application, whether it's a private cloud application or public cloud application, as essentially an app that can withstand outages, that can trigger recovery procedures on failure, and essentially doing that while leveraging the built-in capabilities of the platform. So let's talk a little bit about the different scenarios that we want to work through.
Yeah, perfect. So we do have a couple of scenarios that we have kind of teed up for you guys just to show off some of the things that, of course, Scalr can help you do to achieve these application states. One of them is a private cloud application scenario where we can use auto scaling. Actually, we'll be using VMware in the example today, which, of course, as you guys know, it doesn't natively have auto scaling capabilities, but leveraging a platform such as Scalr to help you manage VMware, we can make it behave more cloud-like. And again, to always maintain that desired state. So in the use case where you may have a minimum of 4 web servers at all times, right? And if the load average goes above a certain threshold, you want to continue scaling, we can absolutely make that happen with VMware. So that's pretty cool, and we should be able to show you some of that. The second scenario is really that master-slave kind of database, recovery or DR event, right? So we need to be able to monitor a master database, and upon a failure event, we need to, of course, promote a replicated copy, the slave database, to the master, and then spin up a new slave and so forth. So, and again, to your point, Ron, we want to automate this stuff, right, to minimize downtime and to truly have a very resilient application. The third one is getting a little bit more outside of just what Scalr does within, say, the UI or the native capabilities, but it actually opens up and shows off a lot of flexibility of the Scalr platform. So having an event-based DR solution, meaning you could have a separate monitoring system that might be tasked with always determining the health of your master database. And if it notices that the master database is not healthy, then it could send an API call or some command line kind of instruction to Scalr to trigger an event-based orchestration, right, to do some of the things we've already talked about. So again, lots of flexibility with that one, and it's pretty exciting. Then the last one, or I'm not sure if it's the last one, but the last one that I see so far is really kind of getting to your point again, Ron, about leveraging some of the native capabilities of the cloud platforms where it makes sense to achieve the desired application state with fault tolerance and resiliency in mind. So we actually have an example where we're going to show a 3-tier application. So we've got, of course, the load balancer, a web service, and a database. But instead of using our own load balancer and our own database, we're going to use cloud services. In this case, we'll be using Amazon today. And we'll show how you can automatically spin up. When you scale things out, they go into separate availability zones and lots and lots of cool stuff with that. So yeah, so that's it for this one. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, as you're kind of building out this application, you're going to build this into the provisioning workflow, right? Like if I got it right, as you're kind of going through how to spin up this application, you're going to go through this process where essentially every time something happens on this application, I want it to happen in a certain way that will ensure the resiliency, if that's a word that I didn't just make up, of that application. It's also important to remember then that you can then use this thing as a template. You don't have to keep doing it for each new app that you provision, but you can then take this whole resilient application that you just built and then package it up, for example, and offer it up on the service catalog. So It's important to kind of stress that everything that we're going through is an example of how you can do something, but also talks to the flexibility that you can take in order to adjust this for the use cases that work for your organization. So if you have any questions about how that might work, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, perfect. That's a great summary and good points there too. And you're right. I mean, there's organizations achieve these types of goals lots of different ways, and so it is very important to know that CMP is flexible, and you can definitely leverage your own methodologies within the platform. That's a really good point. So Ron, are we ready to jump into to the demo at this point?
Yeah, let's do it. I think we can spend most of our time doing the demo, and everyone would like it more than slideware.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm the same way. So we're definitely gonna get into the technical bits, guys. And so we mentioned some of the scenarios we'd like to show you. I do want to describe these for those of you that aren't so familiar. I definitely don't want to lose you in the webinar, so I'd like to kind of go over very briefly a couple of slides to introduce you to some of the things we've built on the Scalr platform, and some of the things we'd be able to show you pretty soon. So, all right, so the first one we would be showing you is really that private cloud use case. So we've got, as I mentioned before, we've got VMware, and we are going to do auto scaling as well as auto healing as well, right? From a database perspective, kind of a DR, auto recovery, master slave configuration. So we have a 3-tier application that is not using, of course, any cloud services, but we've kind of built our own. So we've got an Nginx load balancer, MySQL database, and an Apache web server, I believe, running on Ubuntu. So I'd like to show you guys that one first, and this is just, of course, not a multi kind of zone kind of thing. So it is a single subnet area. And then just to kind of clarify on the DB promotion, right? So when we use custom events and orchestrations that I mentioned earlier, it's really around health checks, right? So cloud-aware, cloud-native applications are very commonly checking health across the app, right? And when something is not healthy, we need to take some action. So in the case of this one, we do have some built-in orchestration inside of Scalr that is going to, there's going to be an event that's going to happen, and we're going to kick off a new kind of an orchestration kind of task, if you will, to go ahead and promote a slave database to a master, and then we're going to create a new slave in its place. And we have a web app that will be able to show us whether replication is active or not active. So that'll be kind of cool to show. Then we've also got a couple of use cases in AWS. I think lots of our customers are already in AWS today, so it makes sense to kind of show you guys this as well. So we will be able to show you a kind of a multi-availability zone use case as well, with, of course, a load balancer web server database with multi-AZ replications going on. And then the last one is to take that just the last step further and to split off a couple of those roles as cloud services, which is, of course, of high interest to a lot of our customers. So we'd like to show you that as well. We'll be leveraging ELB and RDS for those examples there. So with that, we will jump out of slideware, Ron, as promised. And let's go ahead and jump into Scalr as well. So, all right. So I assume that some of you, at least some of you, are familiar with the Scalr UI. We won't really have enough time to kind of introduce you fully to it today. But I will tell you that we are down in an environment right now. We are in actually a POC sandbox that I like to play around with a lot and like to show different functionality to customers as a solutions engineer, right? So we're going to go ahead and play around in my backyard here. I do have, the applications that I mentioned. So let's go ahead and jump into that one. So the first one we've got is the VMware with Nginx, MySQL as a backend, and a web server. So I'm going to jump in just real quick. Again, we're not going to have time to go into the super details of this, but I do want to show you what I showed you pictorially, right? I want to kind of show you what that looks like inside of Scalr as well. So just as a brief introduction, and we won't do this for every single application because they are very similar to Ron's point. You want to be able to kind of reuse methodology, reuse code, and things like that. So, suffice to say that these are all built very similarly. So this one, of course, has an Nginx load balancer that has the right type of security group so that we can, of course, reach it. We've got the web app that has auto scaling set up. Right now, it's got a minimum of 1 instance and can scale up to 5 based on load averages, right? So there's lots of different ways that you can choose when to scale. But of course, one part of app resiliency is making sure that you do not break or fall over when you have too much traffic and things like that, right? So we will have some auto scaling that we can show. And then, of course, orchestration. So when a new role gets spun up, what are some things that we have, built into Scalr in our own orchestration engine, which is very, very powerful, by the way, that can trigger certain things to happen. So first of all, we can, of course, deploy the software that's going to make up our web app. We can configure it. Then we can also do kind of cross-role orchestration here to our load balancer. Let the load balancer know, hey, here we are, register us. You can send us traffic. And then also before we leave, right, if we have some kind of a troubled event and we have to terminate, then we also want to update our load balancer, right? Just keep things nice and tidy. And then from the database side, currently I have the scaling on the database set to manual, and I will show you guys how we can manually scale up nodes of our roles. And of course, the orchestration, we've got what you would probably expect. So we need to let the web app know that, the details of the database it's going to be querying against, of course. And then we also need to set up replication. So as we do scale out and we have new read slaves and so on and so forth, we need to make sure that replication is truly intact and all is well there. There's also some things built into these scripts that will help do that kind of switch over as well, from slave to master in the case that the master goes down. And then I've got something else that's a little bit fun, and hopefully we have enough time to get to it. I've got a custom event that's called PB Dummy Demo DR event, right? So I've got a script that's going to be run when this event happens. Now, of course, this PBDR event is completely custom, right? It's not within the context of when the host is up or terminating or IP address has changed. This is going to be the example where I talked about earlier about having flexibility, where you could have maybe an external monitoring system or some other server that could send Scalr the trigger, right? That, hey, I need to perform some kind of a DR recovery script or something like that. So anyway, that one's going to be fun. Okay, so what does this look like anyway, right? So if I were to go ahead and look at some of the servers that are already up right now, I just have 3, right? So I've got a single Nginx load balancer, I've got a single web server, and a single database, right? So this is a real application, by the way. So I should be able to, if the live demo gods are going to be happy with me today, I should be able to reach the application. So here we go. We actually are reaching it on its public IP, and it is truly got a database backend, right? You will notice, and maybe I'll zoom in on the text here just to kind of make this more visible. You'll notice that we've got several things coming out, like our MySQL configuration and whether or not replication is active. Well, of course, replication is not active right now because we only have a single instance, right? But if I were to scale this up, which I can do, I can go into the role of that particular application, and I can choose to manually scale, as you noticed before, right? It was set to manual, not automatic. And I could say, yeah, let's go ahead and launch a new one. And because, to your point, right, Ron, these roles have reusable orchestration, so you don't have to reconfigure things all the time. This new role, when it comes up, it will have the same orchestration scripts, including the replication, so on and so forth. So as this is going to be coming up here, you notice that was very fast. And I apologize if there's a delay from my screen to your screen. Sorry about that. You might be like a couple seconds behind. And I'll try to slow down, but I get so excited about this stuff. Sorry. So I do have the second MySQL instance that is coming up, so it's pending, and we should be able to check back in on this here in just a little while, and we'll see if that replication factor did indeed change over for us. The other thing that I would mention is, of course, we do have auto scaling in VMware, so and that's not native, right? But if I were to go back into that farm and I was going to reconfigure the VMware farm here. And for the web app, instead of saying minimum of 1 instance, I want to have a minimum of, say, 2 instances, right, at all times. And I save the farm. Scalr in its desired state engine is going to pick that up within the next polling interval, probably less than a minute or something like that. And it will start taking action on our behalf. Oh, look, here we go. It's already going. So here's the web app that's going to come up just to achieve the desired state. Again, to your point earlier, Ron. So with that, we've got these kind of working in the background, and I think it makes sense to kind of cruise on over to another example. By the way, Ron, was that kind of clear? Any questions that you had during that at all?
Yeah, I mean that all that looks awesome. I do have some questions that are coming in from the audience. I think that you're going to touch on some of these if you'll have time, and if not, we'll just follow up over email. So one question I have in here is, can application recovery be initiated from outside of Scalr as well? And I think you might have touched on that.
Yeah, excellent point, actually, and yes, of course it can. And in fact, I can show you an AWS example maybe where I can initiate. Or actually, wait a minute. Let me go and look into this farm real quick. So that was the VMware farm, and I did have an orchestration step that's going to be listening for the PB dummy DR script. Yeah, so actually we could do it right here. So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. The one that I guess I'll show you on this one, guys, is the API. So I can get the server ID of the particular database server, and I can, let's see, let me go grab it real quick. How about this one? And I just need to copy this over because for the API, which I've already got the credentials and everything are already saved, so I can send commands. I basically need two pieces of information. I need to know the environment that this is running in, and I need to know the server ID. And then over here in the API Explorer, which if you guys have not checked this out already, you really should. It's very well documented, and you can kind of try out the Scalr API. So there's actually the ability to fire a custom event, right, straight from an API call, and I can use it from API Explorer. So I'll do that. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and change the server ID for this particular one and fire the event ID as PBDR event, as you guys probably recognize from earlier. And let me just go ahead and authorize and execute this real quick. So as it authorizes and executes, I'll scroll down and I'll see kind of what came back, right? So it looks like, response code 200, it was a success. Everything kind of reached Scalr and it's ready to roll. So let me just jump back over into the CMP itself, and I should be able to check the orchestration log for this one right here that happened at 15:30 my time. And here we go. So on that server, what was actually run was the DR script. And of course, it's a dummy script, but the things you could do here are, of course, promote a slave DB to a master DB, update configurations, and so on and so forth. So I didn't actually trigger that from within Scalr, but I triggered it from outside of Scalr via the API, and I could also do it via command line as well. So that's really cool, and again goes towards the flexibility if you have external monitoring systems or something like that are going to be making these decisions. So yeah, and that's an awesome question. Yeah, so thanks for that one.
Yeah. So you essentially could tie this to, like, you could use the same logic to tie this to anything, really.
That's the beauty of computer science, isn't it, guys? I mean, it's your imagination kind of is the limit. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I was so interested even as a kid in computer science. I mean, you really can. You can build and script anything that you want. And Scalr's not going to block any of that because it's, we're very agnostic, aren't we? When it comes to cloud platforms, when it comes to tools, when it comes to, flexibility to just get things done, right? As you mentioned earlier, a huge value center for us is that user productivity, right? So, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Ron.
Yep.
Yeah, so I did have a couple of others in AWS, right? So that's the private cloud side, and we will come back and check on that in just a little bit and see if replication, and everything is in good state. I do have a very similar one that is in AWS, of course. There's not much difference about this one than the one in, in VMware, and in fact, a lot of cloning happened inside of Scalr to just, quickly create this one, by the way. So I do have auto scaling set up. Minimum of 2, maximum of 5. And of course, I've got orchestration, very similar. The same scripts that we used on the VMware example can be used in the AWS example, of course. So we're not relying on anything that is, say, cloud platform specific at all, right? These are like Python scripts and things like that that are being kicked off in the background. So again, this is very, very similar. But you know what? This might be a good time to look at some of that resiliency that we talked about. So what happens if a server goes down? Well, in this case, I do have automatic or auto scaling set up, right? So I should be able to jump over into the server list for this application. And of these 2 web app servers that are here, right, I should be able to just take one of them down and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and forcefully terminate one of these. And here in just a second, we should see if this auto heals itself. And I don't want to create too long of a list, but I also don't want to keep you guys waiting too long either. So without further ado, I will cruise over to a slightly more advanced example that we mentioned in slide form earlier, where we actually, we're using the kind of the multi-AZ form of kind of managing still your own load balancer and your own database. We're not yet using cloud services, right? But what we are saying here is like for our web app, for example, when it comes to network, we can attach multiple subnets to each of our roles. And what Scalr is going to do in the background is it's going to, if it knows you have multiple subnets and multiple availability zones, as you guys can see here, we've got US East 1A, US East 1B. As you provision and scale up, we're going to round robin those nodes to land in the different AZs, right? Because we assume that's kind of what you want for the multi-AZ fault tolerance. So we do have that kind of set up here as well as on the database side. So when we scale out and have a new read slave, it should be actually in the other AZ. So anyway, as I kind of took one of those. Well, actually, let's dive into this real quick, just a second. The multi-AZ example. Let's look at these servers, and just to kind of show this off a little bit, you'll notice that of these second and third lines, right? You'll notice that one truly did land in US East 1A, the other one truly did land in US East 1B, if you look in the cloud location column. And let's see, on the MySQL, the MySQL instances did the same thing, right, of course. So yeah, so that's just kind of showing that part off. And of course, if I were to hit the load balancer of this one, since I do have two databases, right, I have a master and a read slave up. If I go and hit this web app, unsurprisingly, let me zoom in here for a second. This says, of course, replication is indeed active, for this application, right? And if I were to check back in on the other one real quick, let me just see. I've got a lot of things up here, so let me check. Oh, it looks like I may be running out of resources. Actually, I'm not sure exactly what's going on with one of those. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I have some other questions that are coming in just for a second. Let's see. So yeah, actually, I probably need a little bit more clarification on those questions that were there. So we're going to have to probably follow up on those. But actually, let's jump into the cloud services example as well. So we do have some things going on in the background, right? But I do want to show you guys that you don't have to spin up your own load balancers, right? You don't have to create your own MySQL databases and manage all that, but you can indeed link cloud services. For those of you that are not fully aware or you're kind of new to Scalr, we do have several cloud services that are kind of natively supported within Scalr, right? So ELB, ALB, RDS, well, these are, of course, the ones we'd be talking about for our 3-tier application, but others as well, right? CloudFront and S3 and so on and so forth. So what we did in this particular example is we've got an Apache web server that has a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 4 nodes, right? And of course, we've got an ELB instead of our Nginx, right? So we have ELB that is going to have the Apache services register every time that they come in. And in fact, we can see those under the instances tab here, right? So these are the instances of that web server. And then we've got the RDS in the background that is spread across multiple availability zones. And this is really nice because we don't necessarily have to, worry about our database because we're getting it as a service and it's linked directly to our farm. So anytime that we've got, say, a new web server coming up or whatever, it knows to use this particular database as well. The other really cool thing about this too, Ron, is the snapshots that happen, right, for RDS as well. So I might be jumping slightly ahead, but before I forget, I just want to show that. So for the RDS example, if I were to drop down here, let me show the clusters. So I did create a cluster for this, and it's called the PV Webinar RDS cluster. And it's got multiple, members. So let me go take a look at one of the, well, no, it doesn't have one member because this is very small, right? This is on a T2 instance. It's just for show. There's nothing actually running on this. But one of the things that I could do, of course, is, I could create more replicas if I wanted to, right? Straight from Scalr. I don't have to go directly to, the Amazon console to do any of this. But I could also come in here and check out my snapshot. So for my particular RDS cluster, you can see that I've had this up running since January 6th, and I've got snapshots for each day. And that's just simply a configuration that was set up for RDS within Scalr. You can set this to, of course, whatever you want, right? Whatever your preferred snapshot windows and all this stuff are. But the other really cool thing is if I really needed to recover from one of these snapshots, I can do this, of course, directly from Scalr, right? So I can restore from a DB snapshot, the option down here at the bottom. I can also, view the logs, and I can copy the DB snapshot as well if I wanted to use it for some kind of, benchtop DR test or something like that, right? So this is really cool. And by the way, guys, it's not difficult to build these. And sometimes people, especially new to Scalr, might get a little intimidated right away, but Scalr is so easy to use, and it's getting easier every day. So just as an example, let me show you how, and I won't build this completely out, but I will show you how basically I would build it, right? I would create a new farm, and of course, associated, cost of projects and things. I can add a farm role here, which of course would be an Apache server. So we have some in our quick start already. So let me just choose this one real quick, and I'll make sure to select the appropriate subnet. So I'm choosing the VPC and then the two subnets that I want, one in US East 1A and one in US East 1B. And I'm just going to go ahead and add this to the farm. You'll notice there's some policies and things that are controlling some of my options. Topic for another webinar, but definitely very helpful. Then I can start linking my cloud services, right? So I want an ELB. All right, no problem. Let me go ahead and create a new one in US East 1. So I can create a new one, and I don't even have to leave the screen. I'm going to get a pop-out where I can start kind of specifying the different examples, right? So PB webinar, maybe webinar 2, ELB. And I want to create this where? I want to create it inside of that same VPC, just in my particular example. And I want to have the same two subnets. All right, awesome. And I want to enable cross-zone load balancing. Sure, no problem. And then let's see, like targets. So let's say TCP port 80, and I can add listeners as well, of course, because you have to do health checks, right? So let me just do TCP 80s on both of these, assuming, of course, this has to line up with security groups and things like that, right? But let's just kind of keep this simple for now. And I'm going to go ahead and create. And assuming I didn't mess anything up, it should be created. And automation, right? So what do I want to do? Do I want to automatically register and deregister instances? Oh, well, that's a huge time saver. Thank you. Yes, I would. In fact, I've got a web server, and I want to register this one every time it comes, and I want to deregister it every time it leaves. So let me go ahead and link this to my farm. Boom, I have ELB now. And then just to round this out real quick, I'll just do a simple RDS instance here. I'm going to create a new one. And by the way, RDS, as you guys probably know, it does take a little bit of time to go ahead and provision itself before it can be made available to us. But hopefully it'll be fast. And so I select the subnet group. I've already got, I've got this one that I think I want to use, which is the same US East 1A, US East 1B, and I'll give it an identifier, webinar 2. And M1 small, of course, is going to take a long time to come up. So, and there's some docs, right? There's some handy docs that'll let you know which instance types are truly allowed for different options and things like that, and we can link you directly to those as well. We're going to keep the encryption off, and let's just make this not very secure at all. But I'll do PB webinar as our password as well, and we'll keep that as our initial DB name as well. Of course, you guys could put this wherever you want. Here's the other cool thing. So maintenance window and backups. You remember when I saw the snapshots earlier? One was from the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, whatever. This is where you can configure that as well, right? So when do you prefer that your backups actually happened, and how many days of backups do you want to keep? All that kind of stuff can be configured directly from here as well, without having to go to the AWS console. Again, very helpful. So let's go ahead and launch. Let's see if it liked my instance type. And if it doesn't, of course, Scalr is very handy, and it tells you, oh, you might need another instance type. So, all right, it liked it. Cool. I'm getting lucky today. And I can link this to the farm as well. So in a matter of however many minutes that was, and of course, as I'm explaining things, I'm slowing down, but I have a 3-tier application here already, right? And I could do something as simple as, just save and launch this farm. And let's see what happens. Actually, let me pause at this point and see if there's any additional questions, because we're kind of in the middle of a provisioning cycle here. So any other? Yeah,
so as you were going kind of through that whole example, there are just two points that I want to touch on, and one is that we're using AWS, and a lot of the built-in kind of fault tolerance and high availability that you get within AWS that you want to make sure that you're using as you're provisioning applications and as basically you're kind of getting these things done. The other examples that you went through also touched on VMware and basically making VMware a bit more cloud-like by implementing things like auto-scaling. Scalr does also support Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud and OpenStack and various different flavors of OpenStack from different distributions. We don't have time to touch on all of those. You will be able to find a lot of similar capabilities on different clouds. One of the things that is unique about Scalr is that it doesn't really go for the lowest common denominator. If there's something amazing about one of the cloud platforms that you want to use, like some of the things that Patrick has been going through, we want you to be able to leverage that in a safe way. So as Patrick was going through the demo, you saw that every now and then we saw those little police badge icons. And that basically meant that even now, as Patrick is logged in as an administrator of this environment, he still has some compliance policies or some best practices policies apply to him around which subnets can he actually use, or which instance types he can use, or basically any other aspect you can think of provisioning. So yeah, basically the multi-cloud aspect of it and the policy enforcement aspect of it are also key to kind of building these strong applications.
Yeah, super good points. I mean, the policy engine is a big time saver, but for obvious reasons, right? It sets up guardrails and ensures all the compliance that our customers care about so much. But yes, and then it definitely makes sense to, if you guys are interested in that, right, to have a little deep dive session or something like that. We can show you lots of tips and tricks around the policy engine. It's really good. Yeah. So by the way, Ron, I just grabbed the DNS name from this ELB that we just created, and I know we're provisioning something right now, and I chose very tiny instance types. So I'm not going to win any race here, but I do want to just show you guys how this is, a legitimate application, right? Even though it didn't take very long to set up, looks kind of painless, if you will. And our app, or at least our web server tier, is almost up. So yeah. So any other questions while we're kind of waiting on this part?
Yeah, I mean, I see that we actually have a whole bunch of questions here, like how can Scalr help an application recover from a failure, and how can you help enable the different application states? Which some of these you already sort of touched on, but if you want to give a quick summary of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So probably the first thing that I would say is set up your auto scaling, and by default, as Scalr is a desired state engine, if you say that you have a minimum of 2 servers for, say, a web tier required at all times, if one of those does experience a failure, Scalr will auto heal. In other words, it will provision another node in its place, right? So there's the scaling up because of too much demand. Scalr can take care of that right out of the box. You don't have to leverage any other kind of cloud platform capability. And that's actually why we can do it also on the private cloud. And then, of course, I mean, it goes without saying, but maybe some people don't think about it. But once you scale up, you also need to be able to scale back down, don't you? Right? For cost reasons and other things. So the load averages functionality of Scalr, and always managing and monitoring performance, which, by the way, I do have a couple of graphs on my dashboard right now. That are watching server counts and watching some load averages and things like that on some applications that I just pinned to my dashboard real quick. But of course, as I mentioned, you need to know how to scale up and when to scale up, and to do it quickly, but you also need to scale down. And then the other thing is building in the orchestration scripts to help you configure the different components of your application to cross orchestrate between them as well, which is something I don't think I really talked on too much, but when one node experiences an event, right, it can run a script not just on itself, it can run a script on other members of the farm, right, which is pretty cool. So like, for example, if the MySQL instance in this 3-tier app here in AWS, right, if it were to terminate, right, like say a read slave were to go down or something, it's going to run a script, right? But let's see, this one is, this is the replication. This is the web app config script here. So even though the MySQL instance is going down, it's going to run a script against the web app role. If you guys can see that kind of in the middle of the right-hand pane here. So you can choose where to let people know things, right? People, of course, I'm personifying. They're not even cattle now, Ron, they're people. No, you can let the other cows know, right? Kind of what's going on. So that's really important, I think. Yeah, and by the way, we're showing built-in kind of functionality, built-in kind of orchestration from Scalr. But those of you guys that notice the stuff at the bottom here, right? You can also leverage other tools too, right? You can leverage the chefs and Ansibles of the world and things like that too. So again, going towards the agnostic theme that we've talked about, we do have our own tools, and we welcome yours as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we kind of want to tie all these different scenarios together, then we kind of talked about application resilience, which you can kind of say how you built this application to place servers in different subnets and therefore in different AZs. And then you connected it to RDS with multi-zone replication, and you connected it to a cross-zone elastic load balancer, and you built basically an application that can very easily withstand outages, which was one scenario. Another scenario was more, I guess, the event-based disaster recovery and the master-slave. Those can sort of be put in the same category, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're using similar logic to say, whenever this event happens, I want something to happen. So if you have like a Kubernetes cluster and you have basically a slave that goes down, you want to promote it to a master. We actually have a tutorial about this on the wiki. And of course, you can also use outside metrics through custom events or custom metrics. We have customers using, for example, we're releasing a case study soon, which is about how one customer uses SQS in order to do their auto scaling. So it's a combination of triggering basically automation scripts that recover your application and auto scaling and a desired state in order to build these applications and the database snapshots and all of these. So it's not just one kind of magic button that says that everything will always be on working 100% of the time, but it's the auto healing and auto scaling and also the more manual options that you went through that build these applications as enabled by Scalr that we saw today.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. Absolutely. And the cool thing about Scalr is that it does have very large context, right? All before you even initiated the launch or whatever. And in fact, so I'm logged into an Ubuntu instance in AWS right now, right? And just to kind of give you guys a little bit of idea of some of the environment variables that we can access directly from Scalr. And of course, you can use your own global variables, which are basically kind of like tags, but can be accessed within Scalr as well. Let's go ahead and grep for just Scalr here real quick, and I'll give you guys some idea, because we are using a lot of built-in kind of functionality, but this is a node that was just spun up, right, for one of our applications, and we've got things like what farm do you belong to, right? What is your server ID? All sorts of things, right? What kind of behavior should you have? And these variables can be accessed from within your servers too. So you want to run whatever kind of scripts or whatever, you can reference these environment variables directly, which is really useful. And in fact, I've got, earlier I sent something in via the API, remember? I fired a custom event from the API. I can also use a command line tool here, which is the Scalarizer fire event. And I can fire that same event, right? That PBDR event. Let me just fire that, right? And it's coming off from this particular host. And I should see in the orchestration log, if I go and look, that this event also just triggered. So let's see. Let me refresh this. Here we go. So just now, this just triggered, right? And I triggered it not from within the UI of Scalr, even though I can, right? In fact, I could do that across all the farms if I wanted to. There's multiple ways you can do this kind of stuff, right? I could come and take an action and fire the same event that I just did from the API earlier or from a command line as well. So yeah, I mean, I probably am rambling at this point, Ron, but it's very exciting, right? Because there's tons of flexibility and tons of options that you guys can leverage from the Scalr platform to get these types of jobs done.
Yeah, definitely. And just we'll follow up with everybody after we're done here with some more info and basically everything you need to know about this. And we'll also do kind of a write-up about this. A few other exciting things that we have coming soon is the results of our enterprise cloud management landscape survey that we ran. And the results from that are actually are very interesting. A lot of things that sort of surprised us as well. So we're going to be releasing that pretty soon as well for everybody to see. We'll be following up with emails. If anybody has any additional questions that you'd like us to answer, or any questions about cloud management or the Scalr platform or anything really, feel free to reach out to us directly. You can reach out to me at ron@scalr.com, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. Patrick, is there a final thing that you wanted to show or give a quick summary of what we saw?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I know, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. I could talk about this forever, guys, and thank you for your patience and your attention during the webinar here. I did want to just kind of close the loop on that 3-tier app that we just built with cloud services to let you know that the instance did, in fact, come up, and it is registered to the ELB. And if I point to the DNS name of the ELB, right, I do get to the standard Apache 2 default page. So all of that did work. Of course, we haven't tied in the database in the back end and all that stuff just yet, but trust me, guys, it definitely does work. And there's a lot more that we can discuss as well. But just generally speaking, the takeaway I want you guys to have is, you know, if HADR, fault tolerance, and resilience is something that you guys feel very strongly about, both on your private and public clouds, right? And you're looking also for a CMP, right? We can definitely help you, and we can get you guys, you know, your productivity going up a lot higher, and we can do a lot of things within our CMP without requiring you to go through the cloud platforms, consoles, and things like that, right? So there's a lot you can do within Scalr, and we'd be definitely happy to show you more.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much for walking us through this. Really, really fantastic stuff, and thank you for setting everything up as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
All right, so everybody will follow up over email with some more details. Thank you so much for joining, and we're going to wrap this up and see everybody next time. Bye.
Cheers, guys.